Okay, so this is a bit of a tough topic to address because, well, there isn't a single topic for one thing, but I was originally going to maybe do a Valentine's Day episode or something like that. But instead, I'm going to get a little more serious and talk about world affairs and, of course, the election coming up and all that fun stuff. And really, a lot of this has to do with the return of Jon Stewart to The Daily Show and how the liberals, Democrats, progressives, whatever, the Joe Biden backers are responding to it. There's a lot of criticism that I've seen of his first segment on Monday, and I kind of want to get into that. So to begin with, I'm just going to say I watched a video by Jesse Dollemore, and the title of that is Jon Stewart Blows It on his first night back as Daily Show host. So, what was his criticism? It was that supposedly Stewart was too busy, comparing Jon Stewart with Donald Trump, and he was accusing Jon Stewart of both sidesing it and making them sound too similar and all that. And Jesse Dollemore went through plenty of issues in which Donald Trump looks worse than Joe Biden and all that kind of stuff. The typical stuff that Jesse Dollemore will probably do. And that's understandable, but at the same time, the video that Jesse Dollemore made, in my opinion, falls flat. And that's partly because, well, here's my response. I'll just read my response on his YouTube video, my little comment. I said, "Okay, Jesse, I hate to disagree with you, but here's something you did not mention. Joe Biden has greenlit a genocide we are not supposed to call genocide by a country we are never supposed to criticize, thus losing him votes that Democrats will possibly never get back. Jon Stewart didn't do that. Trump did not do that. That was Joe Biden. And yes, he is old, and yes, you omit the fact that Jon Stewart actually did criticize Trump's various scandals, even in the segment you are discussing. It seems your primary problem is that Jon Stewart dared to mention what everyone with sense can see. The Democratic Party establishment is gambling by gifting Joe Biden the primary, and they don't want anyone criticizing their decision in cult like behavior that's shockingly similar to MAGA. And here's what I said in January on Facebook, to be specific. I wrote that the Democratic Party leaders care more about Biden's feelings than about possibly preventing a second, far more authoritarian Trump term that potentially ends nearly all elements of democracy in this country. Nothing short of a massive general strike is likely to prevent disaster, and I don't think that the general public has it together enough to do something like a general strike. Biden and crew need to start pulling some rabbits out of some hats fast. And I don't normally type words in all caps for emphasis, although I did that in that little Facebook post that probably nobody read. So I think I've stated my position pretty clearly, and not to toot my own horn too loudly, but I think I was even on the eloquent side. And in addition to that, I should also mention that The Daily Show's Jordan Klepper regularly features segments that make Trumpists look like buffoons, and they note all of the ways in which, you know, the MAGA movement is actually a neo fascist movement, and all of that kind of stuff already. So The Daily Show has not really been slacking in that regard, especially not as much as people like just Jesse Dollemore would have us believe. So just because maybe Jon Stewart didn't criticize Trump enough for his liking doesn't mean that it has not been done. It's one of those things like some people would look at my podcast episodes here and say, "Oh, Wade hasn't criticized Trump enough," even though I've done episode after episode after episode where I'm like severely criticizing Trump. And other people would say, "Oh, Wade hasn't been critical enough of Joe Biden." And maybe that's true, but of course there are some people who would absolutely despise me for even the most mild criticism of Mr. Infallible Joe Biden, who has gaffes aplenty, yet, we're supposed to basically nibble on those gaffes like they're our primary source of nutrients. Um, I'm kind of fed up with this stuff sometimes, but at the same time, I feel like I have to plow through this, and I'm not going to shy away from political content entirely. But there's definitely some buffoonery out there. And yes, it does actually come from both sides. And that's not going to change, especially when the people who keep on wanting us to not both sides it keep on giving us ammunition for both sides in it. You know what I mean? Like they are part of the very same problem that they are lamenting so much. Like you have to be able to criticize people like Joe Biden. You have to be able to criticize people like Donald Trump. You can say that one is worse than the other, one is better than the other, but at the end of the day, they both might suck a little bit. And so I'm going to do a little bit additional reading here. This is what I wrote on my blog called Status Quo Defenders. So I said, while I warn again of the orange one, I simply cannot overlook another threat we now face, pretending that greenlighting a genocide is somehow far superior to neo fascism. Yes, I think many of you know what I am talking about, even without my naming names. Tens of thousands have been slaughtered in the name of preventing a hypothetical genocide. As someone with at least the slightest hint of conscience, I cannot say this does not disturb me. I cannot look at that and say, well, at least it's not fascism, or what have you. After all, one of the reasons we recoil in horror at people like Adolf Hitler is the death and destruction he imposed on the world through his vicious worldview. Now, as the death toll climbs higher and higher in the name of global and regional security, and even as international institutions of justice declare these efforts genocidal, can I conjure up even a sane word of defense for these atrocities? I don't think so. I feel I cannot do so. Yes, I can choose to play the game of not calling them atrocities or not calling out the specific nation committing the crimes by name, but we all know the nation, and I think we all know they are crimes. And yes, such policies are easily defended when the one defending them is not the one getting killed or having their home bulldozed or starving to death or simply being culturally purged in some way. So, America's two party system and the global reach of government can still put people in the grave and still endanger future generations further down the line. That much is objectively true, no matter how many people don't wish to see it or wish to sugarcoat its nature. However, there is only so much sugar one can pour out over a field of dead bodies before the absurdity of such efforts is revealed. If nothing else, it simply takes up far too much time and resources. It's a strange practice to sugarcoat death and destruction. Now, as the US government collaborates in committing further atrocities, Joe Biden is becoming concerned about losing votes well after a path of death and destruction has already been created. Ordinary people have lost their lives for no good reason, including so many of the innocent children that politicians otherwise claim to care so much about. War has all but obliterated some regions, yet we are supposed to only focus on poll numbers and electability and, the demographic shift. Like if you're one of the white nationalist type Fox News watchers or white supremacists or whatever you want to call them, just the people who are more concerned about, you know, how the so called traditional America is going to look. And when they say traditional, what do they mean? White Christian nationalist. Well, I refuse to tell people to boycott this 2024 election. And in fact, I will probably actually hold my nose and vote for Joe Biden myself. But I will say I understand those who will boycott the 2024 election. I've always been able to understand people who set out elections. There are always reasons to consider voting or not voting, just as there will always be questions about the basic decisions we all make in our daily lives. However, if your daily life is being risked by various competing factions that may threaten everything you have, what can you say even with a vote? You can only say so much, and you can only do so much. You can only come close to understanding the insanity around you while picking and choosing which parts of it to accept or reject, or maybe to try to escape it entirely to the extent possible. Maybe you can become a hermit in the hills and be relatively unscathed. I'm sure there are some people like that out there. And, that is your freedom. And we are in a situation where it's simply impossible to apply whatever freedom we have wisely, as wisdom has become such a scarce commodity. Really, the only hope that we have, or some of us have, is that we can demonstrate enough conscience and intelligence to find an approximate way out of this madness before it becomes an endless conflagration that engulfs us all. So, on that note, have a nice day. Well, that was how I originally ended that blog post. So, I think that was on the eloquent side. I think I laid out my case pretty plainly. And I'm sure there are people out there who would disagree with me. But at the end of the day, it's true that no matter what your position is, you're going to have people who are disagreeing with you left, right, and center, sometimes for some of the dumbest reasons you could possibly even imagine. And there are always these little curveball disagreements that you would never have seen coming from like a million miles away. They come out of nowhere, and they sometimes those are the weird ones that hurt the most, almost like because they're totally unexpected. They sting from like a strange exotic direction that you never ever had an inkling would happen to you. But anyway, I just wanted to get these thoughts out. And yeah, have a nice day indeed.